Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode in the Run Breiter Podcast. As always, really appreciate you joining. And today we are joined with another awesome guest, which we love bringing on guests here, so they can share their story. Joining us today is Kate Edwards, who I have met through the beautiful internet of the running community. And got to look into you a little bit before the show, Kate, and seems like you're doing a lot of good things, running multiple companies in the running space, as well as seems like you have a lot of knowledge and expertise when it comes to running injuries and prevention and recovery and different things of that nature. But I want you to tell your story here today, and I'm sure I'll have plenty of questions. So if you want to start off with a good introduction, we can go from there.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Sam. I really appreciate it. It's nice to be able to get the word out about how to help runners in any way that we can. And that's really what I do. It's my passion. So if you think about running, I probably touched every bit of it. So everything from I used to do some coaching to I own a running medicine clinic in Atlanta, and I mentor other healthcare providers on how to treat runners. I just held a course last weekend for healthcare providers, which is really fun. I have my own podcast, Interdisciplinary Case Miles, and we break down difficult running cases and injuries. So we always love people to send in. If you have an injury that you're not really sure what to do with, you can send it in and we'll talk about it. And that's a sports medicine doc, running medicine doc, a sports dietitian, and myself. And then I also consult about difficult running cases throughout the country. So people who are really struggling and have seen multiple healthcare providers and don't know what to do and can't do what they love, I often try to help them through that process. So when it comes to running, I love it. And I also, of course, I was a runner. I mean, I should say that because I did 13 marathons, 3 Bostons, and I don't even know how many halves, probably over 50 at this point. So so also running is something that I know very deeply from a personal perspective. So that's probably it. I could talk forever about that, but
Yeah, no, really helpful context for the viewer to get a good jump start on who exactly you are and where you could potentially help the audience. I think jumping right in, something I'd be curious about, because I try to be careful when talking about running injuries. I mean, I've dealt with a pretty good deck of cards as far as like my personal running injuries. I mean, I once pulled a hamstring from kickball, which affected my running, which is so funny. Like so many times, like I feel like runners like get injuries when they're doing things that aren't even running related, but obviously plenty of cases of people getting hurt from running. You're obviously interacting with a lot of runners and providers in the space. What are like the most common injuries that you're seeing pop up with runners? I'd love to just like generally hear about that from you.
Yeah, sure. So running injury is a huge problem, as it sounds like you already know, unfortunately. But up to 80% of runners get injured every year. And that is not acceptable in my book. And this has been the same for over 40 years, despite changes in technology, despite changes in medicine, despite changes in running shoes. So there are a lot of different reasons why we get injured. Most running injuries are overuse, which means it's too much, too soon, maybe not enough consistency going on in your running schedule. So you can get injured if you're not running enough. So if you're only running 1 or 2 times a week, or if you're running far too much, which is, over 7 times a week, or doing doubles all the time, depending on, what your schedule is. So I read this research recently that 75% of runners actually train themselves, and they don't ask for help from any kind of coaching or anything like that. And I think that is also a big problem. For me, I can't train myself. I ask for help all the time because even though I know all these things, I often will just change it based on whatever I think, you know what I mean? Whether that's strength training or whatever. So in terms of running injury, it occurs because lack of consistency. We tend to do too much too soon. And, once you've been injured once, you're at higher likelihood of being injured again. And the reason for that is oftentimes we don't actually rehab our running injuries. We just kind of wait, either stop running, which again, I don't think that that's necessarily the answer either, unless it's a bone stress injury. And that's a different story. But like we either don't rehab the injury at all, or we don't rehab it fully. So then our tissues aren't ready for the load that we're putting back on them when we go back to running. So there are a lot of different factors here. And then of course nutrition. Like nutrition is a really big reason why people get injured. Not getting enough nutrition. Stress impacts running injury. If you're not sleeping enough. So it's really all of these things coming together, which is why it's complicated.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of really good things you said there that I really appreciated. One thing that stood out, 75% of runners are coaching themselves. Doesn't surprise me, but like I've never actually heard of the exact number there.
Yeah.
My previous marathon that I ran was like the first time since I was in high school that I actually invested in a coach. And like, it is like really helpful. I mean, I coach runners on the side and like, I have a lot of passion in doing that, but like sometimes you don't realize until you actually get that service for yourself, like the weight that it takes off your shoulder, the peace of mind, having that other perspective, but also making sure you have someone to tell you, hey, you're doing enough, but you're also not doing too much, that sort of thing, I think is really helpful there. So something I'd be curious on that topic of like self-coaching.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you're hearing about this a lot. There's a lot of advancements as far as like AI and like running apps out there. And I've heard a lot of stories of runners using these different programs and dealing with injuries. Is that something that you're seeing a lot as well?
Yeah, so this is really interesting, especially because you probably know about the app that just got bought by Strava, and they're using yeah,
That was the one I was thinking of.
yeah, and they're using AI to help build out programs. I actually have a running app called RUNsource, and it doesn't do training. It actually is about injury and rehab, which is really cool. And the version 2 was supposed to be out, in the last a couple of weeks ago, but it's probably the next few days or next week, where it does use AI to help organize information that's already in there, built by experts. But all the programs in there are built by me in terms of like how do you rehab from Achilles tendinopathy, and it gives you like strength programs. It gives you information from 50 different experts across running medicine, MDs, PTs, dietitians, everybody. So I think there are ways. So circling back to your question, like I do think there are ways to use AI in a really productive way. So we use it to organize information, to sift through different clinical patterns and things like that to help say, if you have this pain, what is it? And where is it coming from, and how can I help it? But I do think that what's really interesting about AI right now is I actually think, and this is anecdotal, so I actually think it's getting worse in some ways. When I first started playing around with like ChatGPT and AI, I was blown away by how fast it was and what it could pull out. And it still does do those things. There is a place for it, and I think it's really useful. But now what I'm finding is because patients always come in with printouts from ChatGPT and like about their injury. And they'll say like, hey, this is what ChatGPT said, or, Perplexity or whatever it is. And they'll say, what do you think? And a lot of times there is good information in there, but there's also information that's incorrect. And I think that can be translated across any use of AI, whether that's building out your training program, whether that's telling you what injury you have. There are limitations to it. And I do think that if you stick to it without actually getting human input, that injury does occur. Because injury is very individual. And if you don't consider someone's life stress in their training program, then you're setting them up for injury, because our body doesn't know the difference between a 20-mile run or if our child is going off to kindergarten for the first time, or if we're switching a job, or we have financial stress. So there is a place for human coaches because because I'm not a coach, but you can relate to the person. You can say like, okay, these are the stresses that are happening in my life right now, and why don't we modify your training schedule based on that? Now, full disclosure, I haven't gone through this new app in a long time, so I don't know how much they are taking into consideration life stress. And there is a way to use like HRV and heart rate and that data that you can get to help manage that stress load. But there's still this human aspect that I think is really important. I think you have to integrate both.
Yeah. And you just brought up HRV and heart rate, and I know you also talked about sleep earlier, nutrition. There's like so much metrics now that people can track. within their own life and correlate it to running success or success in other ventures. I mean, I think sometimes I struggle because like I want to look at these metrics because if I got a great night of sleep and see how that affects my run, I can like be more predictable as far as like if I should be hard on myself about an outcome of a workout or not. But like I sometimes do feel like tracking too many metrics can almost be like overwhelming. Do you have any thoughts on that for someone who's like trying to find the right balance of like what I should be looking at, what's really kind of just gonna, put on more pressure on myself than is even needed. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do, Sam. Actually, I wrote an article for Run Outside in July about this because it was,
Cool.
yeah, because this is what's happening in real life. You're not the only one. So people are overwhelmed by data, and it's so cool how much data we can get now. And as runners, we're typically, I mean, maybe not everybody, but in general, we're super nerds, right? We love the data. We want to see, but the problem is there's a disconnect between the data and what the data means, and people don't know how to translate them. And so because we don't necessarily know how to translate it, it's not as useful to us as it could be. And that is a huge problem. So what do we need to look at in terms of data? Well, first of all, we can't let the data stress us out because then it puts us into trouble in terms of creating an overtraining aspect. Because again, if we're stressed out about being too healthy, doing all the right things, making sure we understand all the data, now we've just filled our bucket so much it's overflowing, and we're putting ourselves at risk for injury. So there's that. But what should we look at? Okay, there are a couple of things that are pretty useful. I think that your sleep data is really useful, and a lot of the apps and a lot of the watches and a lot of, like even Aura Ring, we don't know, it's not 100% accurate. We know that they're not 100% accurate, but what they do is they consistently track. So even if it's not 100% accurate, the fact that you can pull data for like a month is really useful because we can look at the trend. And that's really what matters, is looking at trends. Okay, you're not really getting enough sleep. What can we do to modify our sleep? What are our sleep habits look like? Are we taking a hot shower before bed? Are we spending too much time on our phone? Is the temperature in our room not right? Are we too stressed out that we can't settle down? So it's really about looking at the trends. And so I have my patients track HRV. I have them look at their sleep, and then I tell them to really ignore a lot of the data that they get on their watches in terms of like cadence or step rate or all of these things, unless I want to use that with a gait retraining thing that I'm trying to do, or I'm looking at their biomechanics and thinking that they need to modify something. But oftentimes what I do is I tell them to bring that data to me and let me look through it and tell them how they can modify it, because I know what that data means, even if they don't.
Something that you have brought up a couple times in different answers throughout the show that I think is like a really important topic as far as like running injuries go is overtraining.
Yeah.
And I think that when it comes to overtraining, it's kind of one of those gray areas where it's like, am I overtrained or am I just sore?
Yeah.
How does one really determine the difference from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are actually several signs and symptoms of overtraining that we can kind of put together. And it's a little bit tricky because there are things that might happen anyway. So it's really thinking about like putting on how many of these signs and symptoms do I have to put me in that overtraining. So HRV is a good way to look at it. Heart rate creep. So in the morning, like if you track your heart rate, if you're not like into all the data, but you know that you're tracking your heart rate, you can look at heart rate creep in the morning. So you can say like, okay, every morning my heart rate has been getting higher and higher over the last 3 weeks. Then that could be an indicator. But also signs and symptoms of overtraining are getting colds a lot, like having a lot of like respiratory infections can be a sign of overtraining. Disturbances in like your gut health can be a sign. Like if you're somebody that's having a lot of like GI issues, it could be a sign of overtraining, or REDS and low energy availability, because they do overlap. You could be somebody that has a lot of muscle soreness, but it lasts for way too long. So it's okay to be sore after a run for like 1 or 2 days, but if you're just constantly sore for 3 or 4 or 5 days, then you're definitely kind of in that in that injury window. Disturbed sleep is actually a sign of overtraining or low energy availability. So not being able to, like, you either have a hard time falling asleep or you are waking up a lot. That could be a sign and symptom. Other signs and symptoms are like lack of training desire. So like, why am I getting out of bed right now? Of course, we're all going to have that at some point. But like constantly, like, why am I doing this? Like asking yourself, like, what? Cognition is actually a sign. So like if you are having a hard time focusing, that is a sign and symptom of overtraining, because you'll start to feel foggy, or like you get really moody at work usually, or just maybe snapping at your family a lot. Those are other signs. And again, a lot of these signs overlap with low energy availability and REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport. So you kind of have to weigh them. But if you start to notice, like if you're like listening to this podcast and you're like, oh, that's me, like checking all the boxes, you're in trouble, man. Like let's get some things in order.
Yeah, so how does someone get that in order if they're dealing with that? Because I'll be honest, like ever since I started using a coach, like I have not felt overtrained. It's almost like I'm questioning why like the training is not as hard as maybe I would do for myself.
Yeah.
But I think we can all like be harder on ourselves than we would be for someone else, because like we're controlling the narrative and we're taking on the risk. Like you don't want to train someone and get someone else hurt, but you're like, oh, like I have fought through all this through the years. Like I want to be the very best. I'm going to take the risk. But yeah, I definitely have overtrained in the past, and I think it's been just really good for like the balance to not. But like, how does someone navigate a situation where they do realize, okay, I'm checking off all these boxes. What do I do from here?
Yeah, so this is a really complicated question. Maybe it doesn't feel like it, but it definitely is.
Sorry for putting a tough one on you.
No, I love it. It's actually, this is the stuff I talk about all the time with my patients, so it's completely fine. I love it. They're great questions. So first of all, one of the questions I always ask someone is, why do you feel the need to push yourself this hard? Because a lot of us we run for different reasons, right? So it's part of our identity, who we are, how we fit into society. Our friend group, 50% of people run with a running partner or running group at this point, which is huge. And so I ask the question, why first? Like, are you trying to prove yourself to yourself or someone else? Do you need this for a social connection? Are you beating yourself up for some reason? Is this to get your stress out? What is the reason? So a lot of people add running because because they're recovering from something. Like, so there are actually a lot of people that run that are trying to run away from things, maybe not dealing with mental health issues, right? So I think that is the number one question I try to figure out first when it comes to someone who's overtraining in my office, is I'm asking them why. I really want to understand what's behind it, because if you need to do it for a certain reason, we have to figure out, okay, well, how can we do it in the way that you want? Or maybe you realize you don't need to do it in this way anymore. One of the things that you mentioned in terms of overtraining in your own experience that I think is something to bring up is that you said that, well, I feel like I can push myself, and I didn't realize that I didn't need to do as much. I think that's also just like a really big misconception in terms of running. Like, we don't have to push ourselves to perform at a really high level. We do have to push ourselves. Let's back up. We do have to push ourselves. We do have to get better. We do have to get stronger. We have to do the speed workouts and all these things, but we don't have to push ourselves as much as we believe we have to push ourselves often. And the more you invest in recovery and rest, the more consistent you can be. And if you're consistent, you can run more, push yourself harder, get faster. So that's the key. Like, if you can figure out how not to push yourself so hard sometimes so that you can be consistent, then you're able to push yourself harder, which is a really funny thing to kind of say, but that's how I like to think of it. If you're somebody that's checking off all the boxes, again, we need to reassess, like, okay, the why, what are we doing? And how is it feeling in our body? And oftentimes I'll say, okay, why don't we have like a timeout? If you feel like you're overtraining and you've got all these signs and symptoms, let's have a timeout, review everything, and let's start again. And this time let's start again. And maybe if you're running 6 days a week, let's try 5. let's take that sixth day and make that a recovery day. Let's make that let's do something really fun that's not running. Let's make that day yoga if you like yoga, or let's make that day a class where you take photography or something. Because a lot of times we also realize that we're pushing ourselves so hard, but we're not really having fun anymore.
Yeah.
So it's a long answer, sorry, but there are a lot of different components of it.
No, I think that's great. Because I think there's so many people who feel as if like by the end of the week, I don't feel horrible and I'm walking around struggling to walk, then like, am I really getting better? But the truth is, as you mentioned, you can perform a lot better than you'd expect if you train smart, you train consistently, you don't overdo it. So that's really good advice. And I appreciated what you said about like, hey, maybe going from 6 days to 5 days, but having that like one focused day on recovery. And there was some different good ideas that you had mentioned. I think something that can be challenging for people in general when it comes to recovery, as well as like where's the juice worth the squeeze as far as X activity with recovery? Because I think with the growth in social media and influencers and brands and companies pushing different things, it's hard to know like what you should do to recover and what not, right? Like when I was first running, using a sauna, using a cold plunge, these are things that like I never thought of doing, and now I'm finding myself doing that pretty often. I have a pair of Normatecs, I use a massage gun at the gym, but like, do I really know what I'm doing? No, I'm just kind of doing what like feels right and like what has been helping me. How does someone determine like out of these different products and services, getting a massage too, or doing something else, like what works for them and what shouldn't?
So it's another great question. In terms of recovery, we think of it as a pyramid at our at our office. One of my PTs actually put it together in a pyramid, and it's really, really great. So first of all, most recovery is free. The best recovery is free. And then it gets more expensive the less necessary it is, honestly. So that's heartbreaking for people to hear that have spent a lot of money on recovery. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to be delivering this advice to you. What's flashy is usually not what you need. But it's fun. I get it. It's okay. Spend your money how you want to. But what I will say is that if you are not managing the basics, then anything else you do doesn't matter. So again, recovery means sleep, nutrition. Those are the number one and number two, like sleep and nutrition. Those are free for the most part. I mean, nutrition can be expensive depending on how you want to think about it. But do that first. If your nutrition is not dialed in, you're not recovering. If your sleep is not dialed in, you're not recovering. Okay. Then you have to think about training. How much time are you spending on your feet? How much time are you actively training? And how much time are you resting? So we have to look at that. So that's kind of like the next thing to think about is what does our training look like? And then we're going to start getting into things like massage and Normatec boots and the massage guns and all of that. So that's going to come a little bit later. Now, it doesn't mean that Normatec is not great, because it is. But if you're not managing your recovery and your sleep and your training, it's not going to help you. Same thing with cold plunge and sauna. There is good research out there about cold plunge and sauna, absolutely. And I think that can definitely be part of your running routine. By the way, you don't have to buy like a cold plunge tub. You could use your actual tub and stick some ice in it. But if you need it for Instagram, or you like really feel like you need a cool looking tub, that's fine too. So it doesn't have to be expensive. I mean, when I first started running and doing marathons, I used to do cold plunge after a race. And it really did make me feel a lot better from a recovery standpoint. But I did it in a tub with ice, okay? So that's because I'm old. So then we start adding those things. So there's so many layers of recovery, but the bottom line is that if you're not doing the basics, nothing else matters. Like, it doesn't matter how many cold plunges you do if you're not fueling your body appropriately. It doesn't matter how many saunas you do if you're not getting enough sleep.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And something that I think could be a good pivot is the topic of nutrition.
Yeah.
I know that's also been brought up a little bit. You inferred earlier the importance in carbs. I'm glad you said that because I very much keep that a part of my diet. Keeps me going. But like, yeah, what is like, I guess generally speaking, and I think we can get a little deeper here as I hear what you say, but like, what is your personal philosophy when someone asks, like, how should I approach nutrition as an endurance runner?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm not a sports dietitian. I like to say that. I work with a lot and I always refer to sports dietitians. But with that knowledge, knowing that I'm not going to tell you exactly what to eat, you should know that getting enough calories is of the utmost importance, and making sure that those calories are appropriately dealt out during the day. So, like there's research that shows that if you're not getting enough calories, you go into what we call low energy availability, and low energy availability can turn into relative energy deficiency in sport, which is basically a lot of those signs and symptoms of overtraining, but also it impacts every single body system that you have. So if you're not getting enough nutrition, you're at higher risk for musculoskeletal injuries. You're at risk for bone stress injuries is a huge one. Like if you're somebody that constantly is injured or sick, you're not eating enough. That's just the way it is. So getting enough calories is the first piece. And then knowing, if you don't know what that means, because a lot of times people don't even know what that means, like how many calories do I need? Well, you need enough for your daily life. So like your basal metabolic rate plus whatever it is you're exercising. So again, that's where a dietitian can calculate that for you. The other piece is that, yeah, we definitely need a lot of protein, especially menopausal women. We know that group, the research is showing that, and by the way, that's like 25 or 30% of all runners. So 57% of runners are women, and 47% of female runners are actually in that menopausal transition. So you definitely need a lot of protein. But bone stress injuries, so that's stress fractures, are actually high. You're at a higher risk for bone stress injury if you don't have enough carbs. And as endurance athlete, carbs are our fuel. So like we need that to fuel our body. So putting enough carbs in your body. There's things called performance plates that are really helpful that the dietitians that I work with often tell their patients to do. So a performance plate is basically, you can find them like the images. We have them on our RUNsource app and everything. But you can look and see like this is how many carbs I need, this is how much protein I need, and this is how many veggies I need based on the amount of exercise that I do. And your amount of carbs increases with the amount and time you're spending in exercise.
Nice. Yeah, no, that's really great advice, and I appreciate that, especially as you're not like specifically a dietitian, but I think at least it gives someone like a good idea of like the areas that they should look into based on like obviously like factual information and everything like that.
Yeah. And I actually forgot to say that you have to time your food too around your workouts, because there is something called in-day energy, low energy availability, which means that you can be at higher risk for injury if you're not eating before and after your runs.
Gotcha. That's super helpful there. I guess something I'm curious about, this is like a whole different topic, but like something that I actually recently dealt with, and I have coached other runners who, luckily for them, haven't dealt with it during a race, but more like training. And I would just be curious on your perspective of this as far as like nerve pain when it comes to running.
Yeah.
So I ran the Columbus Marathon
that one.
2 weeks ago. It was a great race, but we had like really rough conditions. It was pouring rain. It was cold at some points because of the rain, warm at other points because it was humid, really, really windy. And I was wearing a pair of racing shoes that I've worn like the same model at other races. But at mile 10, pretty much my right foot, like I lost feeling in my right foot. And, you know, I decided to change my goal. I was going for a sub 3 hour marathon. I told myself, like, this sucks. This is brutal. I just want to finish the race.
Yeah.
Get that medal and like whatnot, and just go through the experience. And hopefully I don't injure myself. If this gets too bad, I'll stop. But like, you know, I was able to run on it. And after the race, I dealt with like really, really bad soreness for like a week, and then it went away. And now I'm like back in training and I'm fine. But I guess like, what's your perspective on like that story for one? And like, yeah, well, let's just start there.
Yeah. Well, a lot of things came up. One, I love the Columbus Marathon. It's the first marathon that I qualified for Boston at. So
Oh,
I will put that out there. I do love that race.
yeah, it's a really good cause too. So
Yeah.
that made it really special.
Yeah, no, it's great. Second thing is running shoes. So running shoes are usually not the reason for an injury. A lot of people love to blame their running shoes and those poor running shoes, but oftentimes it's not the running shoes' fault. However, depending on what kind of running shoes you are, different running shoes are better for different conditions. And racing shoes actually you have to kind of think about like the surface because some streets are more oily, right? Depending on what streets you're at. And racing flats and racing shoes sometimes don't have enough grip and they can cause like, especially on a rainy day, it can cause you to slide. And that often causes like, you can have hamstring issues pop up or something like that. So shoes are something to consider. And if you've got racing flats and you're running a really rainy, yucky race, you might want to consider something with a little bit of a tougher outsole on the bottom that has a little bit more grip. But if you hadn't tried that before the race, don't do it. Go back to your other ones. So you never try anything. Okay, but when we're thinking about nerve pain, so what you just told me, I'm immediately like in my mind like, ooh, he's got something going on with his lumbar spine. Something's going on with his back because typically you don't lose feeling in your leg and the ability to like move your leg very well unless it's coming from your lumbar spine. So it's possible there are many different things that could have occurred to cause that. But it could have been a fatigue point for you where your running posture was no longer as good as it should be or could be. And it could be that you were extending from your back more than your hip. And that could have created some pinching in the lumbar spine and created some of, because the way that you described it all the way down, I'm thinking like L4, L5, and your back is probably part of the issue. And oftentimes we'll be like, oh, it was my sciatic nerve. Well, your sciatic nerve comes from that area. And yeah, it could be impacted in some way, shape, or form. But if it's cleared up, it means that it probably was just aggravated and it was a lot of pinching, and it probably has to do with postural control, core strength, and running form, and then maybe you like hit your foot funny and slid on the road and created some of that extension through the lumbar spine. So the other thing I would say is that if you have this happen where you're having a hard time like picking up your leg, you're like losing feeling in your foot, I mean, I would definitely see somebody about that just to rule out if there's something bigger going on that might occur in another race. I think people are afraid to see healthcare providers because oftentimes they hear don't run anymore, or you need to stop running or whatever it is. I never say that to my people unless it's a bone stress injury, but we work through it and with the goal that you get back. But it is worth checking out because you don't want that to happen again, and it could be worse next time. And then it could, continue to happen, and it could stick around and not go away.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the advice. That's really helpful. I guess because I've had runners that I've coached bring this up as far as even just like an easy run. Mm-hmm. So you're saying mostly it has to do with like posture. It could be the shoes, but like we like blame the shoes often when like sometimes it's core strength. It sounds like too, but it can be like a foot issue could be correlated to the back, is what you're saying. So I had no idea that.
Most of the time it is when it comes to like that type of thing. When you're describing it how you are. So there are all these patterns. So actually, the new version of the RUNsource app, which please God, let it come out this week. The development piece is so devastating to my whole being, but you could have like put that in the RUNsource app and it probably would have told you what I just said. So that's the cool thing. And then it would tell you what to do. And I did that because only 25% of runners actually go to the doctor. I want people to have good advice and know where to go when they're, they have questions that they need to have answered. So this new version comes out. If this comes out before my my second version comes out, I'm gonna cry. But if it does, and you download the RUNsource app and you can't ask, like if it doesn't look like super cool and it looks kind of like blah, and it doesn't have like a part at the bottom that says agents and programs, just wait a little bit longer because it'll be updated in like a week. I just want to say that because the new version is so cool and you can ask it questions, but I digress. But yeah, so a lot of times just because you feel something in one place doesn't mean that's where it's coming from. And it often happens that like the foot and the ankle, there are a lot of different things that can happen in the foot and the ankle, but it does frequently come from higher. And I am a physical therapist, and it's really sad that strength, I just said the word strength like at 39 minutes of this podcast, but I love strength training. I think it's so important, and I think all runners should do it because it builds you up to be a resilient runner.
Yeah. Is there any specific strength training that you think might be better to put into someone's cadence than others? Because I think some runners are like, well, what does strength training actually look like for me? Am I doing like low rep, high weight, high reps, low weight, full body workouts? Should I focus on individual areas? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Of course I do, Sam. Okay, so first of all, again, like Instagram and influencers can be a real problem when it comes to strength training because it doesn't have to be complicated. That's the first thing everyone should know. It doesn't have to be complicated. And if you do it 2 to 3 times a week, that's plenty. So we don't have to do it as much as we think we do. Again, the RunSource app has strength programs for runners on there, and all of the injury programs have strength you can do, which is really cool. And it's built out by us physical therapists and strength training coaches. But if you have a program, we typically like our programs to be like somewhere between 6 weeks and 8 weeks long, where you do the same exercises for that amount of time, get really good at it, and then move on to something bigger. In terms of types of exercises, again, they don't have to be complicated. You want them to be functional, and you want them to be mimic what we do running. So we do a lot of double leg squats, and we do hip thrust. Hip thrust is literally one of my favorite exercises because it helps with hip extension in running, and it helps really get those glutes firing. Another one of my favorite exercises is the standing clam. I hate clamshells that people give like on your side, but the standing clam is functional. You're in a single leg position, and you're really getting those glutes going. I use it a lot with my athletes for like a warm up before they go out and run. Other things like lunges are great, single leg type exercises, any kind of like balance work. I do think that runners should not be afraid to lift heavy weights at all. That is something that can be incredibly helpful. However, we wouldn't start there. We would start with basic functional movements, learning the skills, learning how to strength train, doing movements that mimic running, and then build on that and slowly get stronger. So if you're someone that never wants to use heavy weights, that's okay, but you definitely should use some weights. And again, all that, like we even have like, the foundations of strength training on the RunSource app so people know like what to look for.
That's great. That's great. Well, you've given a ton of amazing advice today. I do want to really thank you. But yeah, I don't know if there's any like topics that I haven't brought up that you're like, damn, I wish you would have asked me about this, but is there anything there? If not, like happy to like give you the time to just like share how people can find you and work with you and everything like that.
Sure. Thanks, Sam. I think now that we've talked about strength, we're good to go, because if we had left without that, I mean, later I would have been like, oh, Kate, what are you thinking?
Yeah.
And like running form and that type of thing. But I think people can find me at my website. It's Kate Mihevc Edwards. So Mihevc is spelled Mihebc. And that's also my Instagram. So I do a lot. I try to put out a lot of free stuff like this, so people can learn and get the knowledge that they need to stay healthy. I also have a podcast, Interdisciplinary Case Miles, which I mentioned. It's you can submit cases if you are injured and you don't know what to do. We'll kind of go through it and give you advice from a dietitian standpoint, a running medicine physician, and a PT standpoint. It's really cool. And then, if you're in the Atlanta area, we have a running medicine clinic, and I have incredible PTs there. And then if you're not in the Atlanta area and you still you've looked at the RunSource app, and you've looked at, you've gone to the podcast and you've listened to all this free stuff, and you still need help and you're not really sure what to do, you can reach out to me on my website, and I can do like a free 15-minute Zoom call to see if I can help you out. And then if even then you want to continue to work together, we can work together. And I do consulting and kind of like build out return to run programs, and build out strength programs, and build out give you guidance on like how to work with other healthcare providers and things like that. So it can be really useful. One of my clients recently said, well, I think we're close to being done, but but if you really want to work together a little bit longer, we can. She said, I'd sell my liver to continue working with you. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, please don't do that.
Oh.
but it was a really good testimonial.
That's an honor. Yeah, I don't think anyone's ever willing to sell a body part for anything I've done.
I was like, oh my God, please. So funny. But yeah, so thanks so much, Sam. I really appreciate it. And I really do hope people learned a lot from this.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had a bunch of takeaways. Obviously, I'm directly talking to you, but I'm sure, if someone takes away one thing you said, they're going to be benefited from it. I think a lot of like advice we might hear a lot, but it's good to hear from someone that has a lot of credibility. And then like you had a bunch of advice on things that honestly, like I have not heard, which I think
cool.
like is really special because yeah, there's just a lot of information and just like hearing it from someone who's actually in the space, actually working with patients and clients and everything like that, it just adds a lot of credibility. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. And, I view this as a favor to me, you joining the show. So if there's anything I can do for you in the future, always feel free to reach out. But for everyone who listened to the podcast, I really appreciate you joining us. Definitely reach out to Kate if you need anything. If you need running coaching, specifically like a personal custom running plan, I'm not going to be the injury prevention person, but more than happy to help you with your training for your next marathon or local 5K, whatever that might be. And as always, friends, don't forget to run brighter. We'll see you again soon. Thanks.